Is this the best brisket rub ever made? I've experimented for years with different brisket seasonings, and I finally combined all of the best results into the ultimate rub for brisket. In this video, I'm explaining the architecture of this rub, I'm doing a comparison cook with it, I'm showing you where you can buy it, and I'm giving you the recipe so you can make it at home, because I'm not in the business of keeping secrets from you guys, I'm in the business of barbecue secrets. It says so right on my banner that's behind me in every single video. Barbecue secrets, right up there. So if you guys want to make this rub at home, it wouldn't be easy, but you still could, or you could just skip that and go and purchase it directly from Amazon, which is where it's for sale right now. Okay, let's get to the video. Okay, let's start with why I developed this rub in the first place. I think going back maybe a couple years ago, I was using just salt and pepper, and then I upgraded to Lowry's after it became apparent that a lot of pitmasters in Texas were actually using Lowry's as well as salt and pepper on their briskets. So my standard go-to rub has been salt, pepper, and Lowry's for the last at least a year, maybe 2 years now. And before that, it was just salt and pepper. And that always left me a little bit wanting. I compete in barbecue competitions and I use all sorts of fancy rubs with special ingredients in them, and they're super tasty. And I've always wondered why we kind of relegate ourselves to just using salt and pepper and basic spices on brisket when there's all of these other spices that are so delicious. So I thought to myself, okay, I could probably improve on just salt, pepper, Lowry's, especially because in the past year I've been doing all of these crazy experiments. I've experimented with Sumac on my brisket. I've experimented with beef base powder. I've experimented with MSG on my brisket and different formulations and granule sizes. So I decided to combine all of that into a next level rub that I would like to use on a day-to-day basis. And really that's what this is. This Smoke Trails barbecue brisket rub is the rub that I want to use day in, day out on the briskets that I feed to my family and friends. Now let's talk about what's actually in this rub, because it's not simple. This is not a simple salt and pepper rub, guys. You couldn't just throw this together in your kitchen with 2 or 3 ingredients. There's a lot that goes into this, and there's a lot of flavor balancing and texture balancing, and that's what I want to talk about. Mainly texture, color, and flavor. I'll break it into those kind of 3 buckets, and we'll go one by one and I'll explain all the ingredients. So first, let's start with texture. Texture is very important in cooking in general, and especially when developing a rub. And particularly, it's important when cooking a brisket, because the texture of the bark really plays into the whole experience of eating a brisket. You crunch into the crispy exterior of the bark that's got a lot of texture, and then you get into that buttery, velvety, fatty interior of the brisket, and you're biting through different layers with different textures. When it's in your mouth, there's different mouth feels going on, there's different sizes of granules, there's fat, there's meat, there's a whole lot going on, and that is what keeps us stimulated and interested and reaching back for seconds. It's the same reason that French fries are so addictive and delicious. They have that crispy golden brown exterior with that soft velvety interior, different textures, different mouth feels. It keeps our brain stimulated, it keeps us engaged and reaching back for seconds. It's why we like crackers with our soup, because we like differences of texture. We like to have a sip of soup that's hot and really savory. Then we like to have a crunchy cracker that just provides a little bit more engagement and interest. In fact, it's a well-established food science principle that differences in texture and crunchiness, it engages our brain and it makes the eating experience more pleasurable, and it makes us continue to reach back for that next Dorito chip until we have finished an entire bag. So a lot of thought goes into that from a food science perspective, and good chefs are thinking about that too. They're thinking about, how do I vary up the textural differences on this plate so that people are interested in it, it's delicious, and it provides them with an interesting eating experience. And the way I approach that with my brisket rub is I don't just have all the granule sizes the same size. There's 2 different sizes of pepper in here. There's, I think, 20 mesh and 34 mesh. So 20 mesh is just a little bit smaller than your standard Texas style 16 mesh. And then the 34 mesh is more akin to probably table grind, and it just fills in all of the gaps between the larger grains of pepper, creates some more textural differences. And I did the same thing with the salt. There's, I think, 3 different granule sizes of salt in here. So there's large flaked sea salt, which is kind of similar to the kosher salt that you would have on a traditional Texas style brisket. And then there's some table salt sized granules of salt, and then there's powdered salt. So that creates different textures. The larger granules are able to survive throughout the cook, so they can actually hit your tongue at the end of the eating experience. And the powdered salt and the table salt kind of dissolves throughout the cooking process as the fat and the moisture is leaking out of the brisket, mixing with that salt, and it provides sort of a background overall saltiness all spread out over the brisket. So that kind of helps with the texture, but the main thing that helps this brisket rub stand out in terms of texture is it has a high ratio of other stuff to salt. Let me explain that. When you're developing a rub, you have basically salt and what I would call other stuff, everything else in the rub. Salt is the main ingredient in every rub. That's what's going to provide most of the flavor. And it's obviously going to control how salty the end product is, i.e. the brisket. So let's say I made a rub with 90% salt and 10% other stuff, like pepper, let's say. If that were the case, then I'd have a ton of salt. The brisket would be very salty and I wouldn't have a lot of texture because salt doesn't create the best texture. It's really the pepper and paprika, things like garlic, all of the other stuff in a rub. That is what creates a lot of texture because it's not water soluble. The salt tends to dissolve and it doesn't create texture, but the other stuff stays and it creates texture. So if we have 90% salt, 10% other stuff, there's not going to be a lot of texture unless you really dumped the salt onto the brisket until you got to the point where you had a lot of other stuff on there as well, but the brisket would be way too salty. And on the other side of the spectrum, what happens if we had maybe 10% salt and 90% other stuff? Well, I might put a sprinkling on the brisket. We'd have some nice texture with all of the other stuff, but the brisket wouldn't be salty enough. And in order to make it salty enough, we'd have to put a ton of this on until it was just stacked up with pepper, and that's not good because it'll just fall off during the cook and it won't adhere to the actual meat. So when I was playing around and doing different versions with these ratios, what I found is that I really liked 30% salt and 70% other stuff, most of which is pepper, but about 30% of which is other ingredients besides pepper and salt. And that really meant that I could layer on the brisket rub to create the texture that I wanted with all of the other stuff, but I got the saltiness level that I wanted as well. And with a lot of other brisket rubs that I tried out on the market, I had to be sparse with the amount of rub that I put on the brisket because I would easily over salt it and I still wouldn't get the amount of other stuff that I wanted to create that texture. Okay, let's talk about color. And I think that's where this rub really shines actually. This rub will give your brisket amazing bark regardless of the type of smoker you smoke it on. I've smoked briskets on every type of smoker. I started out with a Masterbuilt electric smoker and I got some okay bark with it, but not the greatest bark. And I'd often be disappointed because I didn't get that really deep, dark, Texas-style looking bark that you see on Instagram coming off the pits of some of these top barbecue joints in Texas. I've also used my drum smoker, Kamado smoker, pellet grill smoker, and sometimes I just don't get that super deep, dark bark. And this rub helps out with that because it has a ton of pepper in it, and that pepper is going to coat the brisket quite heavily and create darkness before it even gets any smoke on it because pepper is naturally dark, and it creates a granular surface for smoke to adhere to better, so you get better, darker bark. But the main reason that this rub helps out with getting extremely dark bark is sumac. And sumac is kind of the secret ingredient in this rub. It's a dried berry that's kind of lemony and tart. It's got a bit of sweetness to it, but not too much sweetness. And it just provides a little bit of acidity on the sides of the tongue to balance out the flavors. But the main reason I put it in here is because when it starts to cook for a long time, it starts seeping out its natural sugars, and those sugars darken up the brisket like crazy. It doesn't taste like burnt sugar or anything like that. I wouldn't worry about that. It's like this gooey, natural sugar that comes out of the sumac. It coats the brisket, melds all the ingredients together, and it seems to darken up the bark a lot faster and make it a lot darker. Now, moving on to taste, there's a lot going on here, but I worked really hard to balance out all of the different flavors, and the name of the game for this rub is really flavor balance. I know there's a lot of pepper in it, but at the end of the cook, all of that pepper, it kind of mellows out. All of the natural oils in the pepper that have that really sharp peppery taste, they kind of dissolve and they cook and their flavors are muted, and all of that flavoring kind of seeps off into the liquid that drains off of the brisket, and you're just left with that peppery taste, but it's not overpowering, and we still have all of that more bland pepper that's been cooked for a longer period of time, creating all of that texture, which is what we really want. Going back to what I said about other stuff, all of that other stuff is like the neutral palette upon which we're creating texture so that we're not overpowering the brisket with flavor, but we're still getting texture from these spices. So first and foremost, it is peppery, which I think if we drill down what at least Central Texas style brisket really is embodied by, it is pepper. Salt, obviously, but there's salt in everything. So pepper, 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 pepper. So that's why I focused on pepper in this rub, but it's not overpowering because it gets muted and mellowed out during the course of a really long brisket cook. Then we have salt, which I have different granule sizes, so larger granule sizes survive longer in the cook. They create a little bit of texture if the granules survive long enough and they don't liquefy and cover the brisket, and that kind of hits your tongue. I love when you take a bite of brisket and you just get this huge granule of salt that hits one area of your tongue, and you get this salt sensation in one part of your mouth, and then you take another bite and there's some other big chunks of salt. It just creates a really pleasurable eating experience. And then I have other granules of salt which are table salt sized and powdered salt sized, and those kind of liquefy, mellow out over the course of the cook, cover the entire brisket, and they actually continue to brine the brisket. What I found in a lot of my experiments is that the brisket will continue to brine during the cook, and when you hold it, and I hold it for 18 hours, it continues to brine as well. So all of those smaller granules of salt, they really dissolve in the natural liquids of the brisket a lot more readily, and they will continue to penetrate the meat throughout that entire cooking process. The next biggest flavor that you'll notice besides the salt and the pepper is the umami flavor, and that is from MSG and also two chemicals called disodium guanylate and disodium inosinate. And those two chemicals are kind of the sidekicks to MSG. They help MSG's flavor really pop, and they make whatever you're eating taste super tasty. And that is what I really like about this rub. It's got that umami flavor that I don't see a lot of brisket rubs doing on the market these days, because I think a lot of people are afraid of MSG for some reason. I don't know why. Next, we have Sumac, which makes up about 10% of the rub. And like I said before, that provides a little bit of background sweetness, a little bit of lemony tartness on the sides of the tongue to balance things out. As cooks, we're always trying to balance out flavor, right? So we're trying to get a little bit of sweet, a little bit of savory, a little bit of umami, a little bit of acid. And we want to meld all of those flavors together and balance them. We don't want one of them outshining the other. And that's what this Sumac does. It creates a little bit of subdued background sweetness and acidity. And the last secret ingredient, if you will, I don't know how secret it is, it's on the label, is grilled meat flavor. It's called grillin flavor. And what it does is it replicates the flavor of grilled meat. It's all in the name, right? When you're looking at barbecue, there's two kinds of primary flavors that the cooker actually imparts to the meat. There's smoke flavor, which is what we're all familiar with, but a lot of people conflate this with a second flavor, which is grilled meat flavor. That's the flavor that you can get from burning fat in your firebox, for example. All of those vaporized fat molecules go up into the chamber and they adhere to the meat, and they give the brisket a grilled meat flavor that you would get if you grilled a steak on a hot grill. And a lot of people in competition barbecue will try to replicate that flavor and get it onto their meat because it adds an extra level of flavor that is really delicious. So that's what this ingredient is adding to the brisket rub. It's very subdued, you can barely taste it, but it's just a little bit of background grilled meat flavor to elevate your brisket to that next level of flavor. And finally, there's all of the traditional ingredients. I'm just looking at the label here. There's garlic, onion, sugar, celery seed. So all of the typical savory and sweet flavors that we might see in a barbecue rub, those are there, but they're all balanced out. They're all in the background, and the main flavors are mainly the salt, the pepper, the umami flavor, the sumac, which has the sweetness and the acidity, the grilled meat flavor, and oh, I almost forgot an ingredient actually. This shows how well I know my rub. I also added beef base powder in here. I found that beef base powder really accentuates and adds to the natural beefiness of a brisket, so I've added that in here as well, and that again, really subdued in the background, but I've tried it on my briskets before and it really improves the taste of them, so I decided to put it in my rub, and it just adds a little bit of extra flavor to push your brisket over the top. And that's what's so unique about this brisket rub. I can 100% say there is nothing on the market like this right now. It's not like I just looked at another brisket rub and copied it, or looked at another barbecue rub and took it as a base and then built on it. This is totally built from scratch, from my own head, just based on what I've done experiments with and what's worked and what hasn't, and my own experience. I started with salt, pepper, Lowry's, so that was really my base, and then I just went from there and added whatever I actually liked and balanced out the flavors until I came up with something that was absolutely amazing. Okay, moving on to the taste test so you guys can see how it performs in real life before you buy it. I slathered a brisket with Golden Mountain seasoning as a binder, and then I put down a layer of pepper, then a layer of salt, and finally a layer of Lowry's seasoned salt, pretty standard Texas style brisket rub that a lot of people use and I use a lot until I develop my own rub. Then I season the second brisket with Smoke Trail's barbecue brisket rub. You can see how I'm going very heavy with the rub, about 1/3 of a bottle. I can do that because, like I mentioned before, there's a lot less salt and there's a lot more other stuff in this brisket rub, so we can go heavier to get that extreme texture. We get to the same level of saltiness as the other brisket, but we're adding more rub and we're adding more texture. I smoked both briskets the way I smoke all of my briskets these days, up to 170, then I foil boat it so it cooks more evenly. Then I go up to 190, sometimes up to 195 or a little bit higher. And then I fully wrap with tallow and ghee. Then I hold at 150 for 18 hours. All right, guys, it is the next day and I have the control brisket right here. This was just the Salt Peppers Lowry's brisket. And this is the brisket with my rub, the Smoke Trail's barbecue brisket rub. And now we're gonna do the taste test. I'll show you guys a close-up of the bark right now. So starting with the control brisket, you can see how the bark is actually really nice. It's got some good texture, mainly from just the pepper, and it looks like a great brisket. Got some good bark, got some good color. Now moving on to my brisket over here, you can see that it has excellent bark. You can see the extreme depth of texture on top of the brisket here. That's from all of the different granule sizes in the rub. It looks like it got some bald spots down here on the flat. And this seam fat here on the side of the brisket that I didn't trim away got a little bit blown out. So got a little bit unlucky with this brisket, but that's just the luck of the roll of the dice. So looking really good. The fat, I can tell, is really well rendered and it's got that nice textured exterior. So right now, I mean, I'm obviously biased, but I think the texture on the brisket with my brisket rub looks a little bit better than the one that I just prepared with Salt Pepper Lowry's. Okay, let's slice into the control brisket just to see how these briskets turned out. Look at that one, very juicy. And now we'll slice into the brisket with the Smoke Trail's brisket rub. So it's extremely juicy, and I think that's mainly because that seam fat is so huge, but it's really well rendered, and that is providing a lot of juiciness and flavor. So let's take a slice of the control brisket here. Again, this is just salt. Now you can see on the control brisket, the fat is really nice and rendered. It's rendered all the way down to the meat. That's what we like to see. So let's take a taste of it. It's really good. I'm getting a salty hit. The pepper's coming in. Tastes like a typical salt and pepper brisket. So really delicious brisket. I would serve this up to my family and friends any day. Nothing bad to say about it at all. So let's take a slice of the brisket that I prepared with Smoke Trail's barbecue brisket rub. Go over to the side here, and I'm just going to cut off this unsightly piece of fat. Might keep some of that for burnt ends, actually. Get rid of that guy. And I'll give you guys a look at this. So again, the fat is all the way rendered down, and if you can see, the texture on the bark looks absolutely amazing. It's kind of spiky, various textures. That's from all the different textures of granules in the rub. And that is exactly what I like to see on my preferred style of brisket. So let's pull this apart. First of all, pulls apart nice and easily. Let's take a bite of this brisket. Oh man, that's so good. And I know it's like a super biased taste test, guys, but I like this brisket that was prepared with my rub better than the one that was just Salt Pepper Lowry's. That's why I created this rub, because I like it better than what I was using before. Why is it better? It's saltier, so I added enough of the rub that the salt really shined through to the end. I think you could have a problem if you didn't apply enough of this rub to the brisket, then you might not get enough salt on the brisket. But if you applied as much as you saw me apply in this video, it's gonna be enough salt, and you're also gonna get that extreme texture, which is what I like on this. And once you get past the initial salt and pepper flavor, which by the way, is really subdued by the time that this brisket comes out of the warming oven. It's had 10 hours of smoking on the offset smoker to mellow out, and then it's held for the next 16 hours in a foil packet, and that's kind of mellowed out the pepper flavor as well. So it's just a nice salt and peppery taste, followed by that umami flavor. It's almost like the aftertaste of a Dorito chip. Doritos have MSG, and it's just that really savory, tasty flavor, but it's really balanced with the salt and the pepper. It's got a little bit of sweetness, and it's also got a little bit of acidity from the sumac that really goes well with it. So I'm really loving it. And finally, I thought about keeping the ingredients and the ratios of this rub a secret because I was afraid that, you know, what if other people copy it? But I'm not really too worried about that, to be honest. If you guys want to copy my rub, then all the power to you. Build on it, critique it. If you can use this to somehow make a better brisket rub than me, then I am happy because I want to see advancement in the barbecue world and I want to make the best brisket possible. So I would love it if someone would take my recipe and add something or tweak the ratios to make it better. Please do. If you guys have any suggestions on how I could tweak the ratios or add ingredients or omit ingredients, let me know in the comment section below and I will take them into consideration. Who knows, maybe I'll have a version 2 of Smoke Trails Barbecue Brisket Rub one day. But the ratios, or at least the simplified ratios, are gonna be in the description section below, along with all of the ingredients. Some of the ingredients you might not even be able to buy, like the grilled meat flavor, so you could just omit that if you're trying to make a copycat recipe. And there's different granule sizes you might not really be able to get because every manufacturer and supplier is going to source from different suppliers. So the granule sizes and the specific ingredients, even if it's just basic pepper that's in this rub, is going to be a little bit different because of the manufacturer I use and the suppliers that they get it from. So your rub might be a little bit different if you tried to copy this. And to be honest, it's probably going to cost you a lot more money to buy all those ingredients and source them and measure out 20+ ingredients to replicate this than it would be to just buy it from Amazon, which is where it's available right now. I will put that link in the description section below. So I'd really appreciate it if you support the channel by trying out my brisket rub, and I'd really appreciate it if you do try it, leave me an Amazon review. So thanks so much, guys. It's been a great experience developing this brisket rub for you so that you can make better brisket, and in general, this whole YouTube experience has been great. Thank you guys so much for supporting me and subscribing to my channel. It means the world to me, and I'm looking forward to years of developing more rubs and doing more crazy barbecue experiments and really delving into the mystery of barbecue for your guys' enjoyment and benefit. I will see you in the next video, and until then, happy smoking.